Imagine if you could only communicate with the outside world like 3 days a week.
Wow, okay. That would be tough.
Right. And using nothing but paper, a fountain pen, and a stamp.
So no smartphones at all.
Exactly. No quick text to
Mm.
clarify a misunderstanding. No instant apologies when you say the wrong thing. Every single word you write is deliberate, physical, and, completely permanent.
I mean, that physical limitation would completely overhaul how you construct your identity.
How so?
Well, because in that scenario, you aren't just reacting to the world in real time anymore. You are drafting this highly edited, heavily filtered version of yourself. You essentially become your own PR department.
And that is the exact premise we are exploring today. Welcome to this deep dive.
Thrilled to be here.
Today, our mission is to explore a fascinating novel called The Correspondent by Virginia Evans. We've tailored this deep dive for you today because, honestly, whether you write novels, draft professional emails, or just text your friends, this book is an absolute masterclass in how we tell our own stories.
It really is. It's just a remarkable study in narrative construction. And what sets this novel apart right from page one is its architecture.
Right, the format.
Yeah, the book is entirely epistolary, so there is no omniscient narrator hovering above the scenes, describing the weather or telling us what people are secretly thinking.
It is told 100% through correspondence. We're talking letters, emails, postcards, and I think occasionally newspaper clipping.
Yep, there are a few of those thrown in.
And because of that format, the protagonist, a 73-year-old retired judge's clerk named Sybil Van Antwerp, she functions as the ultimate unfiltered narrator of her own life.
Exactly. We only get to see the world exactly as she chooses to present it on the page.
Right. So to really grasp how she manipulates that presentation, we need a quick snapshot of her current reality.
Yeah, setting the stage is important here. So Sybil is brilliant, but she is incredibly rigid and, quite frankly, completely isolated.
Totally alone.
Right. She lives alone in this house facing the Severn River in Maryland. And most crucially, she's facing a terrifying diagnosis. She is slowly, irreversibly going blind.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So her entire connection to the outside world, her absolute lifeline, completely relies on her fountain pens and her imported English stationery.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to understand Sybil, we really have to look closely at the specific mechanics of how she tells her story. I mean, she doesn't just jot down quick notes on a legal pad when she's bored, right?
Oh, definitely not. The act of writing is a heavily guarded ritual for her.
A fiercely protected one.
Very much so. Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays only.
Only 3 days a week.
That's it. She sits at her desk, facing the river around 10 or half past, and the house has to be completely silent. Or perhaps she's playing a very specific piece by Tchaikovsky.
Right, there's always a soundtrack or silence.
Exactly. And she insists on this rigid visual order, which, and I love this detail, it even extends to her postage stamps.
Oh, the stamp?
She actively refuses seasonal or decorative stamps. She demands only the classic stars and stripes.
Just standard flags.
Yeah, because as she explicitly puts it in the book, there must be order on the envelope.
Wait, I'm a bit confused here. If she is so utterly obsessed with control, order, and this, pristine image of civility, why does her actual correspondence seem so chaotic?
How do you mean?
Well, on one hand, she spends her mornings writing these deeply philosophical letters about grief to the famous author Joan Didion, or praising Anne Patchett for her book State of Wonder, or even writing to Kazuo Ishiguro.
Right, these very high-minded literary letters.
Exactly. But then, in the very same breath, she types out these intensely infuriated multi-page email rants to a random customer service rep named Bassam from a DNA testing company called Kindred.
Yeah, the Bassam emails are wild.
That doesn't sound orderly at all. It sounds like someone spiraling.
Oh, and she also writes to her estranged daughter Fiona, a troubled teenager named Harry Landy, and her neighbor Theodore Lubeck. It's just a huge, eccentric web. It is a huge web. And it does seem contradictory on the surface, but psychologically it makes perfect sense for her character.
Okay, explain that.
So, Sybil uses different recipients to process different fragments of her psyche. Writing to a literary icon like Joan Didion allows Sybil to map her emotions on a highly intellectual, theoretical level.
Ah, I see.
It feels safe because it's abstract, but the vitriol she hurls at the customer service rep, Bassam, that serves a completely different purpose.
She's losing her sight.
Exactly. She is slowly going blind. She is losing her autonomy. She can't fight her own biology, but she can definitely fight a corporate entity over a delayed DNA test.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
Right.
She is displacing her anger about her lack of control onto a target she can actually, yell at on paper.
Precisely.
It makes me think about modern social media, honestly.
Oh, for sure.
Like, Sybil's letter writing routine is essentially her curating a feed. It's just incredibly analog.
Yeah, it's the 1990s or early 2000s version of an Instagram grid.
Right. And she even tells that high school student she corresponds with, Harry, that, and I quote, "Words, especially those written, are immortal. She is hyper-aware that she is leaving a permanent paper trail of her identity." But isn't she essentially creating a fake person?
Well,
I mean, she's only showing people the exact angles she wants them to see.
what's fascinating here is the duality of that exact concept. Sybil views letter writing as the original, purest form of civility.
Oh, yeah.
To her, it's a noble pursuit. You are forced to sit down, think through your sentences, and construct a logical argument.
Right.
But on the flip side, as you just pointed out, it is an impenetrable shield.
Because if you're writing a letter, the other person literally cannot interrupt you. You hold the microphone the entire time.
You control the narrative completely. You have the power to edit out your own stumbles, the messy, raw emotions and the unpredictable, real-time reactions of a face-to-face conversation.
You can just backspace the ugly stuff or rewrite the page.
Exactly. And Sybil later actually questions her entire life's methodology. She wonders if, by conducting her most intimate relationships through the mail since childhood, she has purposely kept a safe, manufactured distance between herself and real human interaction.
Wow.
The letters aren't just communication, they're a force field.
And because she uses these letters to keep people at arm's length, it begs the question, what happens when there is no recipient at all?
Right, when the shield drops.
Exactly. What happens when the shield drops? And this leads us to what I think is the most brilliant narrative device Virginia Evans uses in the novel, the unsent drafts.
Oh, the unsent pages. They are incredible. The ones kept hidden upside down in the bottom drawer of her desk.
Yes.
This is the author's mechanism for delivering Sybil's internal monologue. Because in a standard novel, we just hear the character's thoughts, right?
Yeah, the narrator would just tell us.
But here, even her private thoughts must take the physical form of a letter.
And as a reader, accessing those unsent letters is incredibly disorienting at first. Up until this point, we've only seen the polished, formidable Sybil. But suddenly, the storytelling format turns the reader into her sole confidant.
We become the only ones who really know her.
Right, we are holding the deleted scenes of her life.
Yeah.
And the story we find underneath that shield is just devastating. Through these hidden drafts, we learn about the central tragedy of her life, the death of her 8-year-old son, Gilbert, nearly 40 years ago.
It is, and it is a tragedy compounded by this unbearable unshared guilt. Evans gives us the details in these sort of jagged fragments, which mimics how a traumatized mind actually recalls a horrific event.
The way Evans writes the Canada trip anecdote is just gut-wrenching.
It really is hard to read.
They were vacationing at Lake St. Pierre, and Sybil admits in the unsent draft that she was fiercely ambitious at the time and had brought this massive legal file on the family trip.
She was always working.
Always. She's sitting on a dock, totally engrossed in her reading. Gilbert is out in the water, begging for her attention. He wants her to, score his dive.
Right, like any 8-year-old would.
Exactly.
Hmm.
And Sybil, irritated by the interruption and not even looking up from her paperwork, just waves a hand and says, "Just go, Colt. Jump."
And without her supervision, he dives into a rocky area that the family had explicitly been warned about, and he drowns.
I literally found myself putting the book down after that page. It hits you so hard you realize that her obsession with the rigid rules of the law, her insistence on perfect grammar, the specific stamps, it is all a desperate, lifelong attempt to manufacture order in a universe that proved to her in the most horrific way possible that everything is actually chaotic and random.
That's spot on, because the law is black and white. A neatly penned letter is black and white, but the reality of that lake was terrifyingly gray.
Yeah.
And Evans uses the physical object of the unsent letter to represent the crushing weight of that unresolved grief. I mean, think about it. An unsent letter is the ultimate paradox.
How do you mean?
It is a communication medium that is actively being used to not communicate.
Oh, right.
Unlike a deleted Word document on a computer today, these pages take up physical space in her drawer. They haunt the room.
And that haunting completely fractures her family.
Yeah.
I mean, her husband, Dane, eventually moves to Belgium. We find out through the drafts that years later, when Dane is dying of cancer, He writes her a letter, finally forgiving her, acknowledging his own failures in the marriage.
Yeah, that part is so tragic.
And Sybil writes this beautiful draft back, but she just places it in the drawer. He dies before she ever puts it in the mail.
It really highlights how the absence of communication can be just as destructive as the words themselves.
Yeah.
And it's in another unsent draft, this time directed toward Joan Didion, where Sybil rejects the societal cliche that grief is just a season.
Yes, she hates that idea.
She absolutely loathes the terminology, the whole idea that implies winter naturally, predictably turns into spring.
That passage is incredible. She basically argues that human suffering doesn't follow some predictable meteorological pattern.
Right. She describes life not as a cycle of seasons, but as a long, lonely, wind-blown road.
Wow.
She says most of our existence is spent walking out in the wildness, in the bitter cold. And occasionally we spot a light in the distance, a stopover of happiness. We go inside, we sit by the fire, maybe we stay for a few years.
Like her time with her son.
Exactly. But a sudden tragedy, like Gilbert's death, is a violent ejection back out onto that cold road. Grief, in Sybil's view, isn't a process of moving forward. It is the desperate, constant, and often futile attempt to walk backward, trying to find the warmth of that specific stopover again.
That is just beautiful. But, she's built this entire paper fortress to keep that past locked in a drawer. But the problem with the mailbox is that it goes both ways, right?
Right. Your mail always comes back.
The outside world can mail you back. And Evans doesn't just use letters for internal musings. She uses the mail to deliver actual, heart-pounding plot progression.
Which, by the way, is incredibly difficult to execute in an epistolary novel. You would expect a book of letters to feel sort of static, but it forces the reader to experience suspense in a very distinct, agonizing way.
Totally. Let's look at how this happens with the Kindred DNA test. Remember those angry emails to the customer service rep, Bassam?
Oh yeah, they pay off.
They eventually yield results. Sybil, who was adopted as an orphan, gets an automated email notifying her of a 49% DNA match with a woman in Scotland named Hattie Gleason, meaning they are full sisters.
And that single digital document unearths an incredibly cinematic backstory. We learn that their biological mother, Louisa, had arranged for a smuggler to get the family out of danger. But when the getaway car arrived in the fog, the smuggler claimed he only had room for 2 people, 1 adult, 1 child.
And ultimately, Sybil is the child left behind on the pavement.
Exactly.
That alone is a massive revelation, but Evans layers it with a much darker immediate threat, the stalker subplot.
Oh, this part is so tense.
It is. Amidst her regular correspondence, Sybil starts receiving venomous, threatening letters signed only with the initials DM. The writer clearly knows her daily habits. They describe the exact shape of her mailbox. They even sneak into her yard in the middle of the night and cut all the blooms off her flowers.
The physical vulnerability of her situation really comes into sharp focus here. She lives completely alone, and her eyesight is rapidly deteriorating. She can't even see who might be watching her from across the river.
Right, she's practically defenseless. But it's the teenager staying with her, Harry, who eventually figures it out. DM stands for Desi Martinelli. Desi is the son of a man that Sybil and a judge sentenced to a really harsh prison term decades ago. It brings the consequences of her professional life crashing right into her living room.
And it forces Sybil to confront the darkest corner of her own morality.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because Sybil doesn't call the police.
No, she doesn't.
She writes a confession letter directly to her stalker. She doesn't hide behind legal jargon or defend her actions. She admits that when Desi's mother came to her office to beg for a lighter sentence for her husband, Sybil was intentionally cold and unyielding.
And the reason for that is just staggering.
It really is. The meeting happened just weeks after Gilbert drowned. Sybil looked at Desi and his brother, 2 healthy, vibrant boys, and was consumed by bitter resentment. She writes this visceral realization on the page: if I could not have my family back, then why should she?
It is a profound admission of how raw grief can entirely corrupt a person's sense of justice. But beyond the emotional impact of that, we really have to look at the literary mechanics of how Evans builds suspense here.
It's like watching a lit fuse in slow motion.
That's a great way to put it.
Because in a normal thriller, a character makes a confession and the bomb goes off immediately in the dialogue. Someone shouts, someone throws a punch. But here, you see the spark when she drops the letter in the mailbox, and then the explosive is in transit for 3 weeks. You, the reader, are trapped in the waiting.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, This delayed narrative tension actually perfectly mimics the pace of real-life emotional processing.
Oh, that's true.
True revelations, profound forgiveness, or deep understanding, they rarely happen in a snappy 5-minute conversational exchange like you see in movies.
Right.
They take weeks of silence. They require internal wrestling, drafting, and discarding thoughts before we can finally articulate our truth. Evans basically uses the lag time of the Postal Service to replicate the lag time of human psychology.
I love that framing. The postal lag is the psychological lag. But the overwhelming tension driving the final act of the book is that she is rapidly running out of time to process any of this. We mentioned the ticking clock at the beginning, her oncoming blindness.
Yeah, time is running out.
What happens to the ultimate storyteller when she permanently loses access to her medium?
Well, it taps into her most primal fear. She begins experiencing these highly visceral nightmares.
Oh, the dream sequences.
Right. In one, she sits at her beloved desk, but she's pawing helplessly at a sheet of paper like a cat, completely unable to pick it up.
That's terrifying.
And in another, her expensive fountain pen turns into a limp noodle in her hand. The ink spilling onto the page is just senseless, chaotic scribbling. It represents the complete disintegration of her identity.
She actually confesses to Harry at one point that without her ability to read the mail and write her replies, she will be like a fish plucked from a pond and tossed onto a sun-baked dock. She assumes she will simply cease to exist.
But the beautiful thing is she doesn't cease to exist, and this is the core of Sybil Van Antwerp's transformation. As her vision finally begins to fail her in earnest, she is forced to make an agonizing choice.
The ultimate choice.
She can barricade herself in the house and isolate completely in the dark, or she can finally drop the paper shield.
And she chooses to drop the shield.
Yeah.
She makes the incredibly vulnerable decision to let her neighbor, Theodore, step into her private sanctuary. Because she can no longer see the page, she has to dictate her final, most painful letters out loud to him.
Including the full, unvarnished story of Gilbert's death.
Yes, which she finally sends to her newly discovered sister, Hattie, in Scotland.
And the physical act of dictation completely alters the dynamic. By letting Theodore physically transcribe her words, she is entirely giving up control.
She can't just hit backspace in her head.
Right. She can't silently edit a sentence she doesn't like. She is letting another human being witness the messy, unedited, real-time drafting process of her mind. And in sharing that vulnerability, they fall in love.
It's so poetic.
By losing the very medium she used to keep the world at a safe distance, she accidentally stumbles into the intimacy she had avoided her entire life.
And her legacy shifts from the physical paper to the actual people she impacted. I mean, look at Harry, the troubled teenager she mentored through all those letters.
Yeah.
He takes the lessons she taught him about constructing a narrative and ends up writing his own novel called Dynasty of Sight.
He learned how to build a world by watching her meticulously build hers.
Exactly. And toward the end of the novel, as Sybil reflects on the massive archive of letters she has produced over 70 years, she has this profound moment of acceptance. She says, "I guess in one way I am a writer. I am a correspondent."
She realizes that her life's work wasn't a published book. It was the active, ongoing engagement with other minds.
So what does this all mean when we zoom out from Sybil's specific tragedy and her fountain pens? What is the ultimate takeaway of this journey for you, listening right now?
Well, this raises an important question about the nature of how we connect with each other. Sybil's arc demonstrates that true storytelling, the kind that actually sustains us, isn't about perfectly crafting a polished, impenetrable image.
It's not about the PR department.
Exactly. It is not about a curated feed. It is ultimately about having the courage to share the messy, unedited truth with someone sitting in the room with you. Her letters served as a crucial bridge, but eventually you have to put the pen down, cross the bridge, and stand face to face with the other person.
It is such a powerful reminder. The Correspondent proves that our lives are ultimately just the stories we manage to communicate to others. And reading it really forces you to interrogate your own methods of communication.
Oh, absolutely.
We live in an era of fleeting texts, instantly deleted photos, and rapid-fire emails. What permanent story are you leaving behind? If someone were to piece together the digital and physical paper trail of your life right now, what kind of narrative would they reconstruct?
Would it be a carefully curated facade of a person who always has it together, or would they find the truth?
It makes you wonder how much of our true selves we are actively editing out every single day just to maintain a sense of order.
We edit out a lot more than we realize.
We really do. And that brings us to a final lingering question to ponder on your own after this deep dive ends. We spent a lot of time today talking about how Sybil's truest, most vulnerable self didn't live in the perfectly penned letters she mailed across the world,
Right, her true self lived in the unsent letters.
the ones hidden upside down in her bottom drawer. So think about your own digital drawer. If a complete stranger could somehow read all the messages you never sent, the deleted drafts, the erased texts you typed out in anger or profound sadness and then just cleared, the long emails left lingering in your outbox, what kind of protagonist would they think you are?
It's the unedited manuscript of who we really are behind the shield.
The ultimate narrator stripped of the ink, the delete button, and the polish. Something to think about the next time you hit backspace.